I think a Mediterranean strategy that applies to the Northern Mediterranean or EU Mediterranean will never be effective because 30% or more of the coastline is non-EU. And so you really have to understand the impacts coming from outside the EU and finding a strategy to deal with that. One of the important things to consider is that a lot of the projects, EU-funded projects, tend to focus on the Mediterranean waters of the EU. So what we were trying to do was identify these issues in the South and the East Mediterranean and how maybe the EU projects in the EU Mediterranean can solve these issues or help solve these issues. So I think there are opportunities that we need to find in these non-EU waters, and the key here I think is to not look at things from a top-down perspective only, but also to understand where these connections can be made on the ground between sites and between people and between institutions, because that's where the learning and the sharing happens. We heard from different people about, so the decision makers say and feel that the scientists should take it upon themselves to communicate the adequate science. And I really believe that there is an intermediate role. And it's this role that I mentioned of, if we use this restaurant analogy of the chef, the waiter, and the client, but it needs to be a very acknowledged and acceptable role, and it needs to be present because on both extremes you have people who are too busy and perhaps too set in their ways to actually come into the middle and understand how best to use the evidence that's produced.